Hey y'all, here are OS Reviews. In this video we're taking an unboxing and first impressions look at the Oukitel C38. This is a relatively affordable budget Android smartphone selling for under $200 and includes 6 gigabytes of built-in RAM that can be augmented with virtual RAM expansion up to 24 gigabytes. There is a 6.6-inch Full HD Plus resolution IPS LCD display, a 48 megapixel primary camera on the rear, 32 megapixel selfie camera, and it also comes with a pretty large 256 gigabytes of built-in ROM for storage, although that can be augmented up to 1 TB using a micro SD card. It is a dual SIM phone, so the second slot can act as memory expansion, and it supports 4G LTE bands globally. Other quick specs here include the typical connectivity such as GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and there's also a fairly large 5,150 milliamp hour capacity battery. Now this phone comes in 3 color variants aside from the white colorway. It also has a slightly more, I think, unique looking jade, aka light green, as well as a black version that you can pick between, and it's also using Corning's Gorilla Glass 5 for the protection of the glass on the front that should prevent it from getting scratched and cracked as easily. Now, aside from the primary camera, it also has a depth camera for bokeh, as well as a macro lens for close-up shots, but unfortunately that res is quite low, so it's really more just for fun than anything else. Would have preferred to see a ultra-wide angle or a telephoto zoom lens instead. I think that's more practical, but it is what it is for a budget phone. Now, this is a brand that we are more commonly associated with rugged devices. We've seen some of their offerings in the past that offer water, dust, and also drop resistance to military specifications, but in contrast, this phone is more of a typical, normal device, so it's going after a bit more of a stylish appearance. It does come with a free TPU silicone case in the box as well, adding a little bit more to the durability of the device. And aside from the phone, we do have a SIM ejector tool included, a quick user guide, warranty card info, as well as a pretty standard USB Type-C to Type-C charging cable, as well as adapter can also be found in the box. And in terms of the ratings here, we can see that it is going to be a 18-watt charger. There is also a factory pre-applied screen protector out of the box. We can also kind of peel away the top layer and still provides us with one more layer left there, adding some scratch resistancy. You'll find up top the teardrop notch housing the aforementioned 32 megapixel camera along with the earpiece, and then the screen itself does have a slight chin at the bottom, but also respectable for what it is. Now, the frame of the phone is going to be constructed out of polycarbonate plastic as opposed to, say, aluminum, but does have some slightly flattened edges on the sides. As you can tell, they're giving it a little bit more character. A loudspeaker at the bottom along with the Type-C port for charging. Dual SIM card slot on the right-hand edge, and the very top is also flattened and tapered off. That being said, it certainly isn't bad looking, especially for a, again, phone in the $100 to $200 price range that Oukitel is going for, and the very back here is quite glossy. There's a slight hump to the camera array, but it's thankfully flattened out once you pop on that TPU silicone case. Again, I do think the jade colorway as well as the white might be a little bit more eye-catching, but even this black version does shimmer a little bit if you catch it on the light just right. It is a little bit of a fingerprint magnet though, so I would recommend popping on the case. We also have the aforementioned 3 camera lenses along with a LED flash. It does also remind me a little bit of some of the kind of Huawei phones, maybe something like the P40 or P50 series when you're looking at it from the rear. The phone does have a fingerprint scanner integrated into the power key here on the edge. It's fairly nicely placed and responsive enough. There's also a volume rocker that feels pretty tactile. The screen here, by the way, is fully laminated, so there is thankfully no gap between the Gorilla Glass and the actual LCD underneath. And as an alternative to the fingerprint scanner, you can also use Face Unlock, but it's not quite as secure since there is no real depth sensor, so it's still using that single front-facing camera, but it's another option if you're looking for it, or a password or PIN. So otherwise, we are then greeted into the Android operating system. You can choose between gesture navigation or the traditional virtual hotkeys at the bottom, and it does have a overall relatively clean software experience. All the standard Google apps are built on in, including the Play Store that you can access. But aside from that, there are a handful of just small utility extras from Oukitel, including their version of the kind of clock app. As you can tell, they're slightly customized compared to stock. You'll also find a built-in easy launcher mode, which will basically allow the phone to be slightly more intuitive to use for the elderly or for children, making the icons bigger as well, almost in this Windows Phone-esque experience. But that seems to be mostly it. You won't find a toolbox on here, interestingly enough, since that's kind of a staple on many of the rugged phones that we've seen from Oukitel in the past. Aside from that, there's the regular Google News feed here on the left, and by default, there are no additional app tray or drawer, but you can bring that back just by long pressing, clicking on Home Settings, and if you prefer, you can bring back that launcher style into default, and we should now be able to trigger that drawer just by swiping up, as you can tell there. So pretty clean, and if we swipe down, this is what the notification tray looks like. This is the maximum brightness of the display at the moment, which actually is very good in terms of legibility. First impressions being that I think the screen might be one of the biggest selling points or attributes of the C38. Everything else about it, again, is a little bit more of a budget, mid-range device, but the colors, as well as the viewing angles and brightness, on first impressions at least, do seem to be slightly above average on this particular unit, and you are able to also trigger different wireless options from here, including Wi-Fi, GPS, Do Not Disturb, Night Light, as well as screencasting. And if we do jump into more advanced settings here, we can also see a little bit more customization going on from Oukitel's part with a more colorful appearance to some of these menus. If we take a quick peek here at display, we do have adaptive brightness controls and also a dark versus light theme. Although, interestingly, there doesn't seem to be quite as much custom profiles that you can change for changing it to colder versus warmer, as well as there is no additional refresh rate settings, it looks like. So this is going to be a pretty standard 60 hertz refresh rate. That is also one thing I would have liked to see 90 or 120 even on a budget phone in 2024, but it is what it is. And similarly, some other profiles can be found. At least the responsiveness here so far seems to be doing all right, and it is technically powered by a MediaTek Helio P60 processor, which is also known as the MediaTek 8788. It's Octa-Core chipset, 12 nanometers, and it seems to be a decent kind of entry-level processor, but of course it's one that we have seen. When it is installing updates or booting up for the first time, you may have to give it a few extra seconds, and then it will become a little bit more snappy. So better than you would typically expect if you're just using it for light tasks, but of course, if you are trying to use it for gaming and you're doing more intensive GPU-related tasks, it may not be the forte. Some other quick options under settings include the memory expansion, so virtual RAM can be augmented to add additional 18 gigabytes, taking some of the 256 gigs of the ROM. Custom gestures include 3 fingers to capture a screenshot. You can drag down like so, as you can tell there, as well as flip the phone around to silence a incoming alarm. And kind of last but not least, it is currently running on Android 13. Would have liked to see 14 for a new device coming out here in 2024, but at the very least, there is nothing from the Play Store that you aren't able to install. But again, continued OS level upgrades is something I will always want to see more of from some of these smaller brands, since the current practice seems to be limited to essentially the one that it comes shipped with, even though there are some occasional security patches. And then also jumping into the camera here for a final look, we are granted with a beauty mode as well as video recording, and it looks like HDR can also be used in video capture for a more dynamic pop. That being said, for resolution, it looks like full HD is going to be your maximum here. So would have liked to see again 2K or 4K, but kind of expected for a device that is sitting at kind of the entry-level bottom tier of their product catalog at the moment. Under more, though, you will find a Pro control for allowing to adjust properties like ISO and white balance more manually, and also capture with bokeh artificial blur in the background. There's the macro lens mode and also another QR scanner. Taking a quick look at some of the results, overall I would say it's an average camera for a budget phone. It's not going to beat an iPhone or a Pixel, but mostly expected. Close-up shots in terms of macros also look solid enough for, again, a device in its class. HDR in this case also makes a pretty dramatic difference when it comes to boosting the saturation of colors and also some textures in the shadows. That being said, this is a camera that doesn't really have optical image stabilization, so you still have to hold relatively still, otherwise you may notice a little bit of fuzzy details if you're not too careful, and similarly in low light performance it's going to struggle a bit more when it comes to textures and also colors. But overall, again, mostly expected for a camera in its price range, definitely not shabby for just preserving your memories, as long as you have your expectations tempered. And now moving to a quick demo of what audio sounds like and video consumption performs by playing back a YouTube clip. So overall, the mono speaker, although of course not as rich as the stereo set, actually doesn't sound too shabby. It's not too thin sounding, and you still get decent enough volume output for just consuming quick clips on YouTube, as well as just listening to some podcasts, things like that. And the display quality, again, is just a little bit higher quality than I'd usually expect for a super entry-level phone. For example, again, viewing angles are quite satisfactory. It even looks a little bit more saturated and vibrant than I was expecting. And similarly, even though it's not a flagship grade processor, it seems to hold up quite well for just general navigation. Things like video consumption don't really pose an issue for this phone's processor to handle, as you can tell there, still remaining pretty responsive for just general navigation and media playback. Also, antenna reception quality was quite good. I was consistently getting almost full bars for both dual band Wi-Fi as well as 4G LTE with AT&T here in the Seattle region. In similar fashion, basics such as the built-in microphone also sound to be decent.
A demo of what the microphone and speakers sound like.
It was pretty realistic in picking up my voice for things like phone calls with a bit of ambient noise reduction as well. In standby mode, the phone actually dropped less than 1% overnight, and in terms of screen on time, it was able to average over 7 to 8 hours. So it's actually pretty impressive considering it is a full HD resolution screen and not too dim either. So battery performance has been surprisingly quite positive. It should pretty easily get you through at least 2 days of usage before you have to really recharge it again. Here's also a quick web browsing test. Let's go into a more complex site like The Verge. And overall, again, you can see that more complex sites still load up in a pretty reasonable amount of time as well, again, helped by the decent antenna reception strength. So even though this page has plenty of videos as well as ads, complex elements, it still seems to be responsive enough for just reading back things, and the decent enough amount of RAM on here as well allow you to open up, in my experience, around a dozen or so tabs, and pages didn't re-render or reload too often in the background either. So for simple things like, again, video consumption as well as web browsing, you should be mostly content. I do wish, again, maybe the screen refresh rate would have been something like 90 Hz for even smoother scrolling, but all in all, not bad. And as far as doing a little bit of gaming is concerned, you can certainly play back most tap-and-go style titles. Lighter games in general will still load back surprisingly quite decently on here without as much stuttering or slowdowns as I expected for an entry-level phone like this. That being said, heavier titles like PUBG as well as Asphalt series, you will have to be a lot more patient. You can still download and play them back, but you have to just wait longer for them to load back, and the frame rates may not be the smoothest 60 FPS 24/7. Again, if you are more light on gaming, it should still be a serviceable enough experience, and in similar fashion, social media apps, whether it's WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, and the like, should all play back and load on here really without too many issues. And so that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Oukitel C38. At least on paper, it doesn't seem like the most exciting phone because it really is just an entry-level device. I think the real-world performance is actually a little bit better than expected looking at the specs and the price range alone. It offers pretty solid battery life, a relatively fast and responsive fingerprint scanner, as well as good enough performance to get by with the basics. So if all you need is a simple smartphone, maybe as a backup device for travel as well, it could fit the bill. That being said, like other budget phones we've seen in the past, you can't expect too many extras when it comes to photo quality being merely just okay, as well as, again, a faster refresh rate screen I think could make it even more competitive, all wrapped in a relatively stylish design. Overall, again, just shows that this company is trying to experiment at the very least with making some more devices that are cater towards the mainstream, as opposed to only producing rugged phones that we've seen from them in the past. So you can learn more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Oukitel C38.